Welcome to Understanding Autism Spectrum Disorders. In this brief presentation, we're going to look at what the diagnosis of autism is, what autism spectrum disorders are, as well as what the impairments are that our children with ASD might display. When talking about autism, this falls under the umbrella of pervasive developmental disorder. Autism spectrum disorders include three diagnoses: autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, and PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. In order to get a diagnosis of autistic disorder, the DSM criteria states that a child would have A. Qualitative impairments in social interaction, qualitative impairments in communication, restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, B. Delays or abnormal functioning that began prior to the age of 3, and C. That the diagnosis would not be better accounted for by Rett's or childhood disintegrative disorder. When looking at Asperger's disorder, this is typically characterized by individuals who may show social deficits and restricted patterns of activities and interests similar to autistic disorder. However, they may show few or no cognitive or language delays. With PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, these individuals may show patterns of the autistic syndrome but have a later age of onset, and they may show only some of the symptoms or even less severe symptoms. When talking about the prevalence, over the past few years, reports have indicated that approximately 1 in 150 to 166 children would be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The last U.S. study by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that 1 in 88 children would get a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. What we know is that the number is continuously climbing, and that up until now, the cause of autism is still unknown today. Autism is, however, present at birth. The diagnosis can be given as early as 18 months, some say even earlier, and autism spectrum disorders are present in every country, every ethnic population, and present in all socioeconomic ranges. One thing that's important to remember is that if you know one child with autism, then you know one child with autism. Things have to be individualized, as each child will differ greatly in their skill level and in their weaknesses. What you may see is uneven performance or skill development or splinter skills. So for example, you may have a child who has a difficult time when it comes to communicating vocally. However, they may have a really exceptional memory. Or you may have a child who can communicate very effectively. However, they may have a difficult time with things like social skills. When looking at the impairments, we're looking at three major areas: impairments in communication, impairments in social interaction, and behaviors that are repetitive, stereotyped, and restrictive. We're going to look at these a little bit more detailed in just a second. Let's talk about behavioral excesses and deficits first. When looking at all of the impairments that our children with autism may have, these could be characterized as behavioral excesses or behavioral deficits. Excesses are behaviors that we see too much of. So for example, you may have a child who engages in repetitive behaviors such as hand flapping or rocking, or that talks continuously about Thomas the Tank Engine. Those could be considered behavioral excesses because they're behaviors that we see too much of. We may also see behavioral deficits. These would be behaviors that we don't see enough of, and these could include things like the child making eye contact, or the child having the ability to sustain a conversation, or engage in play with other kids. Those may be things that we don't see enough of. Let's look more specifically at the impairments in communication. Some of the things we might see are a delay in or total lack of the development of spoken language. Some children will be able to speak vocally, and some children early on may not be speaking vocally. What's going to be important is making sure that they have mode of communication, whether they're using signs, picture icons, picture exchange communication system, or alternative communication devices. Every child should have a means of communication. We may also see marked impairments in the ability to initiate or sustain a conversation. So you may see that your child is able to answer simple questions or say simple things, but when it comes to starting a conversation with peers or with family members or sustaining a conversation, they may have a difficult time with that. We may also see stereotyped and repetitive use of language or idiosyncratic language. So again, you may see what's known as echolalia. So this may be where the child repeats a certain sound, a certain word, or parts of a sentence over and over again. When we're looking at impairments in social interactions, here are some of the things that we might be seeing. Limited use of multiple nonverbal behaviors. Things such as eye contact may be difficult for our children with autism. Some children may be able to make eye contact no problem, and some others may seem to avoid making eye contact. What may also be difficult for children with ASDs are making appropriate facial expressions, body language, and gestures, but also understanding the facial expression, body language, and gestures of others. What you may also see is failure to develop peer relationships that are appropriate to the developmental level. So if you're working with a child who has a difficult time with communication skills and also has a difficult time with social interactions, then it may be seen that they have a difficult time when it comes to making friends. This can certainly be overcome, but some work may need to be put in. We may also see lack of spontaneous seeking to share enjoyment, interest, or achievements with others. This is also known as joint attention. So this may be something, for example, with other children, we may see that if a plane goes by in the sky, they may look at it, point to it, look at you to see if you're seeing the same plane, and want to share that excitement with you. For our children with ASD, this may be something that's really difficult for them to do. We may also see lack of social or emotional reciprocity. And again, this is just that our children with autism may have a difficult time understanding the emotions of others or being able to display their own emotions in a way for people to understand what they're feeling. Restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped behaviors. What we may also see is abnormal preoccupations with one or more stereotyped patterns of interest. For example, you may have a child who really enjoys Disney movies and all they want to talk about is Disney movies, or all they want to do is play one certain game and they don't want to play other games. Apparently inflexible adherence to specific non-functional routines or rituals. Now what's important to remember here is that we all have our routines that we follow. I, for example, have a morning routine and I do basically the same thing every morning in the same order. With our children with ASDs, however, if there is disruption to their routines or rituals, this may be really difficult for them to handle. And so work may need to be put into helping them adjust to changes in routine. Stereotyped and repetitive motor mannerisms. You may see in your child that they engage in behaviors such as hand or finger flapping, rocking, or walking on their tiptoes. And you may also see persistent preoccupation with parts of objects. So for example, maybe your child is playing with a toy car, but rather than making the car go up and down a ramp, putting gas in the car, having people get in the car, they may be stuck on just spinning the wheel over and over again. What's important to remember too with the repetitive behaviors is that we all engage in behaviors that stimulate or reinforce us. For example, do you know someone who twirls their hair or flips their pen or tends to shake their leg when they're sitting in a meeting. These are all repetitive behaviors that we do. However, some behaviors may be more pronounced in children with ASD. What we need to remember is that they're getting some sort of feedback or reinforcement from engaging in these behaviors. Other impairments that you may see are limited or restricted play skills, limited observational skills. What this means is the child's ability to imitate or to observe what others are doing and then do the same thing. This becomes really important not only in school but also in preschool and daycares when children need to imitate what the other children are doing. You may also see difficulties in motor skills. The difficulties in motor skills could be fine motor skills, such as writing or printing or typing, or they could also be gross motor skills, so things like running, galloping, or climbing. You may also see sensory sensitivities in some cases, where some children may seem a little bit sensitive to certain sounds, loud noises like blenders or vacuums. This is not always the case, but you may come across this. Difficulties and delays in adaptive skills. Everyday skills like toileting skills, eating skills, getting dressed. All of these things may need to be taught really specifically. You may also see difficulties or delays in pre-academics, and you may see some challenging behavior like aggression, self-injury, or tantrums, but this is not always the case. What's important to remember with all of these areas of impairments is that all of these skills can be taught. The level and skills and delays presented are very different across children in each domain, so we really need to build on the child's individual strengths and help them with the weaknesses that they're presenting. And each child is going to learn differently and be motivated by different things. So we need to figure out what works for each individual child. And the last thing that is crucial to remember is that each child has the potential to learn. So hang in there. Thank you.